The quiet man with the empty plate. The ballroom was filled with glittering chandeliers, soft violin music, and people who had forgotten how to speak kindly. Gold forks tapped against fine china, and laughter echoed from polished marble walls. It was a private royal fundraiser. A secret gathering meant only for the elite. The room sparkled, not because of the light, but because of the pride each guest carried in their eyes. In the corner of the hall, just behind a tall column, stood a man in a plain black suit. His name was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't on the guest list, but he had received a quiet invitation from someone important. He had arrived early, blending into the shadows with ease. Most people didn't notice him. Those who did assumed he worked there. The first insult came quietly. An older man with a thick silver watch walked past Keanu, looked him up and down, and said, "Still waiting for the wine? Make it quick." Keanu nodded politely and didn't correct him. He had learned long ago that some things were not worth fighting, not yet. As the night stretched on, Keanu stood silently near the buffet table. He hadn't eaten. He wasn't there for the food. He was watching, listening, remembering. A tall woman in a red dress snapped her fingers at him. "You there? Yes, you, waiter. I asked for sparkling water 10 minutes ago. What kind of service is this?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked away. Keanu walked slowly toward the kitchen. He didn't say a word. His steps were soft, respectful. He poured a glass of water and carried it out with care. She snatched it from his hand without even a glance. People laughed. Not at her, at him. Whispers began to move like smoke through the room. Is he really a waiter? No name tag. Probably hired last minute. What's wrong with him? He just stands there. A young man with a sharp jawline and cruel smile stepped forward, holding an untouched plate of lobster. He waved it at Keanu like bait. "Hey, you forgot to refill the bread basket. Chop chop." Keanu looked at the man and then at the table. He picked up the basket without complaint and turned to walk away. Then someone else said it. Poor guy. Must be desperate for tips. They all laughed again. No one noticed the quiet woman in the corner of the ballroom, the one wearing a deep green dress and a pearl pin in her hair. No one realized who she was or what kind of power she held in her voice, but Keanu noticed her, and she noticed everything. Half an hour later, the host tapped the microphone. Silence fell across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said proudly, "we are honored tonight by a very special surprise guest, a woman of great dignity, wisdom, and global respect. Her Majesty, Queen Elena of Serenia." The crowd gasped. The woman in the green dress stepped forward. No one had expected her. They had assumed she was another donor's wife, someone rich, but unimportant. Keanu watched her step onto the small stage, calm and graceful. Her eyes scanned the room, but she did not smile. She took the microphone slowly. "I saw something tonight," she said softly. "Something many of you missed." People leaned in, curious. "I saw a man being spoken to like a servant, ordered around like he was invisible, treated with less kindness than a used napkin." Nervous laughter filled the air, but the queen raised her hand. Silence returned. "What none of you realized is that the man you treated like a waiter, the man who served you without complaint, is someone the world has admired for decades. Not because of his fame, not because of his wealth, but because of his kindness." The queen turned her head. Her eyes met Keanu's. "Mr. Keanu Reeves, would you please join me on stage?" The room froze. Some jaws dropped. Others turned pale. A single glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. Keanu did not move right away. Not because he was shocked, but because he was still watching them. He had seen their laughter, their judgment, their cruelty. He walked forward slowly, each step quiet and sure. Queen Elena smiled gently and offered him the microphone, but he shook his head. "Your voice is stronger than mine tonight," he said, softly enough that only she could hear. She nodded, then turned back to the crowd. "He came here tonight not to impress you, but to honor someone he once knew. A boy named Samir. a young refugee from a war-torn country who once saved Keanu's life in a way no money ever could. This fundraiser was meant to build a new hospital in Samir's name, but instead it became a showcase of pride, not compassion. She stepped forward. "You all thought you were the guests of honor. You were wrong." Her words hit like cold water in a burning room. "Keanu Reeves served you tonight, and in doing so he exposed something many of you need to face." A man in the back stood up. "We're sorry, we didn't know." The Queen looked at him. "But now you do." Then she turned to Keanu. "Would you still like to say something?" she asked. Keanu looked out at the faces, some ashamed, some angry, some empty. And then he spoke, slowly, carefully. "I've played many roles in my life," he said, "but tonight you reminded me that the most powerful role any of us can play is to be kind when no one's watching." His words sank deep. No music played. No applause followed. Just silence. Until one woman at a table near the front stood and said, "I spoke badly to you earlier. I'm sorry, I judged you, I'm ashamed." Keanu nodded. Others began to stand. Apologies began to rise like waves, but Keanu didn't wait for them. He walked off the stage and headed toward the hallway, where the quiet lights didn't judge anyone. The Queen followed him. As they stepped away from the crowd, she asked, "Are you okay?" He smiled faintly. "I've been treated worse." She laughed, then stopped. "But tonight wasn't about you, was it?" "No," Keanu said. "It was about Samir." The Queen paused. "We'll build the hospital," she said. Keanu looked at her. "And name it after him?" "Of course." Just as they reached the door, the Queen turned around. "But I'll be back," she said. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She smiled. "Because this story isn't over yet." And in the room behind them, someone whispered, "Who else have we misjudged tonight?" But no one answered. Not yet. Because something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The letter no one expected. The next morning, the grand ballroom was quiet, stripped of its masks and music. All the lights had been turned off except one, a single chandelier still swinging gently from the night before. Outside, the streets were filled with news vans and camera crews, their voices whispering stories none of them fully understood. The world had caught a glimpse of something real, and it wasn't sure what to do with it. The internet was already flooded with short clips from the night. Some showed the Queen's speech. Others focused on Keanu's quiet expression as he stood beside her. People online debated whether the moment had been planned or spontaneous, real or staged. But those who were in the room knew the truth. It wasn't a performance. It was a mirror. Keanu had left before the final speech ended. He didn't wait for the applause or the cameras. Instead, he walked out into the night, carrying nothing but a folded piece of paper in his pocket. It was something the Queen had quietly handed to him before she disappeared backstage. It wasn't royal paper. It wasn't fancy. It was written, in a shaky hand with blue ink that smudged at the corners. The name at the top of the page was one he hadn't seen in over 20 years. Samir Ben Halim. Keanu sat alone in a small hotel room near the edge of the city. The blinds were half closed, the coffee beside him untouched, and the folded paper finally open. He read the letter slowly, like it might vanish if he turned the pages too fast. It began with a greeting, written in broken English, just like Samir used to speak when they first met. The words were uneven, sometimes misspelled, but full of warmth. "Dear Keanu, I hope this finds you. I have no address for you. I told the Queen everything. If you are reading this, it means she believed me." Keanu stopped reading for a moment, his throat tight. "You once told me that people only remember what they want to. You were wrong. I remembered everything. I remembered the night you gave me your jacket in the snow even though you were freezing. I remembered how you taught me to fix bicycles when everyone else called me a thief. I remembered how you didn't flinch when I told you I had nowhere to sleep. You didn't ask questions. You just made room." The letter continued, telling a story that very few people knew. It told of a time long before the fame, when Keanu lived in a small studio apartment in downtown Los Angeles and volunteered at a youth shelter once a week. Back then he didn't have much, barely enough for himself. But he always brought a box of books, a few extra sandwiches, and a quiet presence that didn't demand attention. That's where he met Samir, a boy who had escaped war but carried it in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you a long time ago," the letter said, "but I thought you had forgotten me. I was wrong. The Queen found me. She asked me who my hero was. I gave her your name." By the time Keanu finished the letter, his hands were shaking. Not from sadness, but from something older. A memory, buried so deep it almost felt like a dream. The letter ended with one last line, simple and sharp. "You once saved my life. Now I want to help you save others. If you're reading this, it means we still have time." He sat back in the chair, the letter resting on his lap. The room felt smaller now, as if the past had entered quietly and sat down beside him. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, soft and silent, covering the noise of the city. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant reopening wounds he had hidden for decades. Later that day, the Queen sent her driver to pick him up. She didn't tell him where they were going. She simply said, "We're going to meet someone important." The car was quiet, and Keanu didn't ask questions. The streets were crowded, but the driver moved carefully, taking back alleys and narrow roads until they reached a gated building with no signs and no guards. It looked abandoned from the outside, but when they stepped through the rusted doors, Keanu stopped in his tracks. The room was filled with blueprints, medical diagrams, and dozens of photographs pinned to the walls. Children from all over the world, sick, injured, forgotten. And in the center of the room stood a woman with kind eyes and hands covered in ink. She turned when she saw him. "You're taller than I imagined," she said with a smile. Keanu blinked. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," she replied. "But you knew my brother. I'm Layla, Samir's sister." His breath caught. He hadn't even known Samir had any siblings. Layla walked forward and handed him a folder. Inside were designs for a children's hospital unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't just a hospital, it was a sanctuary. A place where language, money, and background didn't matter. The walls would be painted with hope. The rooms would be filled with stories. Every detail had been created by Samir before he died. Keanu looked up, his voice quiet. "When did he—" Layla nodded slowly. 2 years ago. Cancer. He fought hard. He wrote to you many times. But the letters always came back. Keanu sat down, overwhelmed. He felt both the weight of loss and the strange warmth of knowing Samir had never forgotten. Layla continued, her voice gentle. "Before he died, he told the Queen that only one person could lead this project. Only one person could carry his story forward. Me?" Keanu whispered. "You," she said. "Because you showed him kindness when the world didn't." Keanu stared at the blueprints. The dreams of a boy who had once slept on cold pavement. The dreams of a boy who had believed in goodness even after everything was taken from him. And then Layla handed him one last envelope. It had only 2 words on it, written in Samir's handwriting. "Do more." Keanu didn't cry. Not yet. He simply nodded, stood up, and said the only thing that made sense in that moment. "Let's begin." But just as they were about to move forward, the door burst open. A young man in a dark suit stepped inside, his expression panicked. "You need to see this," he said. "Someone is trying to shut down the project." "Who?" the Queen asked from behind him. The man looked at Keanu. "Someone powerful. Someone who doesn't want this hospital built. They say it threatens their interests. They're already moving money, blocking permits, even launching a smear campaign." Keanu frowned. "Why would anyone do that?" The young man hesitated. "Because they know who Samir really was, and they don't want his truth to come out." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "What truth?" The man swallowed. "Samir had something. Someone doesn't want the world to see it." Keanu turned to the Queen. "What did Samir give you?" The Queen looked at Layla, then slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a small metal drive. "He gave me this," but I haven't opened it. Keanu took the drive in his hand. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of weight, but because of what it might contain. We need to find out what's on it, he said. Before they do. And just like that, the story took a sharp turn. No longer just about kindness, no longer just about memory, but about a truth someone powerful had buried deep and would do anything to keep hidden. The drive that held a kingdom, inside the quiet study of an old monastery repurposed as a safe house, Keanu sat at a thick wooden table surrounded by silence so deep it felt sacred. Layla stood behind him with folded arms while the Queen, unusually quiet, stared out the window toward the horizon. The metal drive in Keanu's hand was small, but everyone in the room felt its weight. Outside, the winds had picked up. The snow had stopped falling, but the air was sharp and cold, as if the world itself had paused, waiting to see what would happen next. The young man who had delivered the warning earlier now returned with a secure laptop. One he claimed had never touched the internet, never seen the cloud. It was clean, untouched, impossible to track. They needed that kind of protection now because whatever was inside this drive was already stirring shadows they couldn't see. Keanu didn't hesitate. He slid the drive into the laptop's side port. The screen blinked, went dark for a second, then filled with a password prompt. Layla moved forward and placed her hand gently on Keanu's shoulder. He gave it to the Queen, she said. Maybe. The password is something only she would know. The Queen stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. Samir once told me that if you want to hide something forever, you put it inside something beautiful. She typed in one word, Serenia. The screen unlocked. What appeared next was not what any of them expected. It wasn't financial data. Wasn't a will, wasn't a letter. It was a video, grainy, shaky, clearly recorded in secret. The timestamp showed it was filmed 15 years ago in a war zone far from where they sat now. The first frame showed a child, dirty and thin, crouching behind a crumbling wall. Layla gasped when she saw his face. It was Samir, no older than 10, clutching a worn notebook to his chest. The camera shifted quickly. There were voices in the background, angry, violent, speaking a language none of them understood. Then came a soldier, heavily armed, dragging a man by his collar. The man was coughing blood, struggling to breathe. He looked like a journalist or maybe a rebel, someone who had seen too much. The soldier shouted something, shoved the man to his knees, and raised a rifle. And that's when it happened. Little Samir jumped from behind the wall and threw himself between the gun and the man. Even through the poor video quality, they could see it, the courage in his eyes, the raw fear and the unbelievable strength in such a small body. The soldier froze, startled. Then someone off-screen yelled and everything went black. The video ended with the sound of footsteps running and a soft voice whispering, "Hide this." Keanu leaned back slowly, stunned. Layla was already crying. "He never told me," she whispered. "He never told me he did that." The Queen looked pale. "That's not just any soldier. The insignia on his arm belongs to a private army, one linked to a man named Damien Voss." Keanu frowned. "Who's that?" The young man with the laptop spoke now, his tone cautious. "Damien Voss is one of the richest men in Europe. Owns security firms, oil companies, banks. He moves behind the scenes. You never see his name in the news, but he controls more than most presidents." Keanu nodded slowly. "So if that video gets out, it exposes him. And worse," the Queen added, "it shows his forces were executing civilians, including children." Samir stopped that execution. He saved a man. Maybe someone important. Keanu stood and began to pace the room. "That's why they're trying to stop the hospital. They know this video will resurface if we build something in Samir's name. They're afraid the truth will crawl out of the walls." Layla looked up, her voice shaking. "But why now? Samir died 2 years ago. The drive stayed hidden until last night. How did Voss even know?" Keanu stopped pacing. "Because we talked about the hospital on stage. In public. Someone must have been watching." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "And now that we've seen this, we're targets." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the Queen spoke again, her tone steely. "They want fear. They want us to stay quiet. They want us to think silence is safer. But I refuse to be ruled by shadows. She looked at Keanu. The question is, do you? Keanu didn't blink. I've lived in shadows most of my life, but not anymore. As they prepared to leave, the young man received a text message and his face went pale. They're already here, he said. A team of lawyers just filed injunctions against the land meant for the hospital. Reporters are digging into your past, Keanu. They're trying to make you look like a fraud. Keanu almost laughed. They're going to need better material. I've made mistakes, but I've never sold my soul. As night fell, they drove, in silence, toward the Queen's estate, a place with private security, silent halls, and high walls. But even there, safety felt thin. Keanu sat by the window of his guest room, watching snowfall return in soft, drifting flakes. He was thinking about the boy who once jumped in front of a gun without knowing what it meant to be a hero. He was thinking about Samir, about how he had lived a life far too short but filled with more courage than most people could carry in a lifetime. Then, around midnight, someone knocked at the door. It wasn't the Queen. It wasn't Layla. It was someone Keanu hadn't seen in 15 years, a man with tired eyes and a scar across his cheek. You don't remember me, the man said softly, but I remember you. Keanu studied the man's face, his voice, his posture, and then he saw it. You're the man in the video, he said slowly. The man nodded. Samir saved me, and now I need your help, because Damien Voss knows I'm alive, and he's coming for all of us. The man with the scar and the name they erased. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of an old wall lamp and the flicker of snow dancing against the tall windows. Keanu stared at the man who had just walked through the door, the one whose scar stretched across his cheek like a signature left by history itself. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but thick with questions neither of them knew how to ask first. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the man stepped forward and closed the door behind him, not with fear but with the calm of someone who had spent years hiding in shadows and now walked with quiet defiance. Keanu watched him carefully. The man had the worn face of someone who had survived too many fires without ever putting down the matches. You saved a lot of people in your films, the man said quietly. But Samir saved me in real life, and now it's time for me to return the favor. Keanu gestured for him to sit, but the man remained standing, glancing at the curtains and corners, always checking, always cautious. It was a habit that came from running too long and trusting too few. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice lower now. My name was Joseph Durrani. Now they call me Nothing. I used to be a war reporter back when I thought truth could change the world. I believed in the power of stories, until my story became a target. Keanu listened closely as Joseph began to explain what had really happened all those years ago. Not just what was seen on the video, but what had followed after. He told him how he had been documenting war crimes in a restricted zone, how he had uncovered evidence linking Damien Voss's private army to illegal arms deals and civilian massacres, and how he had been captured while trying to smuggle that footage out. The plan had been simple: get the footage, expose the truth, and get out. But something went wrong. They caught him. They beat him. They prepared to kill him. And then out of nowhere, a small boy with fire in his eyes had thrown himself into the line of danger without a second thought. That boy was Samir. Joseph never forgot that moment. Not just because it saved his life, but because it reminded him of something he had lost. The belief that innocence could still exist even in hell. After he escaped, he went underground, changed his name, removed his prints from all databases. For years he stayed silent, not because he was afraid to die, but because he knew that the moment he spoke, others might die too. Voss had eyes everywhere. He didn't kill people loudly, he erased them quietly like they had never lived at all. And now that the video had resurfaced, Joseph's time had run out. You need to understand something, Joseph said, finally sitting across from Keanu. This isn't just about a hospital, it's not just about a video. Voss sees this as a crack in the wall he spent decades building. If this truth escapes, It's not just his empire that collapses. Others will fall with him. Presidents, generals, businessmen, the kind of people who don't lose. Keanu sat quietly, letting it all sink in. He wasn't surprised by how deep the roots went. He had spent years learning that power doesn't shout. It whispers. And when it feels threatened, it doesn't argue. It erases. So what do we do? Keanu finally asked. Joseph looked at him. You have two choices. Either release the video now, let the world see it, and prepare for the war that will follow, or disappear, shut the project down, and live knowing that the hospital will never be built, and Samir's story dies in the dark. The choice sat like a stone in Keanu's chest. Both paths came with consequences. But one came with betrayal. Later that evening, they gathered in the Queen's private conference room. Layla, Joseph, the Queen, and Keanu. The Queen had been briefed on everything. Her face remained composed, but her fingers tapped the table. With subtle tension, Layla sat with the blueprints on her lap, clutching them like armor. Joseph stood near the fireplace, always watching, never fully still. If we go public, the Queen said, we'll need allies. People who believe in justice more than comfort, and we'll need protection. Not just for us, but for every child in that hospital who may become a target. Keanu nodded. Then we find them. Because I'm not letting Samir's name fade into silence. Not after what he did. Not after what he gave. The plan was simple in theory, but dangerous in reality. They would release the video anonymously through an encrypted channel tied to humanitarian watchdogs around the world. They would leak documents confirming the identities of those involved, including Voss's private army, and connect the evidence to current operations. But most importantly, they would release Samir's story, not just as a victim, but as a symbol. A symbol of how courage can rise from the dirt, how kindness can disrupt evil, and how one boy's act of selfless bravery could shake the roots of power itself. As they finalized the plan, Layla stood and walked to a nearby drawer. She pulled out a small box, the kind used to hold jewelry, and handed it to Keanu. Inside was a medal, old, tarnished, but meaningful. Samir found it in a ruined school, she said softly. He used to wear it like it made him bulletproof. He said if the world wouldn't give him honor, he'd give it to himself. Keanu held the medal in his hand, his eyes burning. He earned it, he whispered. And now, we give him the world. But just as hope began to bloom, darkness knocked again. A phone rang. It was Joseph's. He answered, listened, then went pale. We've been found, he said. They know where we are. An explosion rocked the front gate. The lights flickered. Guards shouted outside. Keanu grabbed Layla's arm and pulled her behind him. The Queen stood tall, her voice commanding. Get to the east wing, it's the only way out. Joseph pointed at Keanu. You take the drive, hide it. If they find it here, everything ends. They ran through the estate's side corridors, dodging shadows and the sound of boots pounding against stone. Outside, black vans had surrounded the building. Masked men with rifles moved like a private army. Silent, precise, ruthless. This wasn't a warning. It was an erasure. Keanu and Layla reached the hidden stairwell that led to the cellar tunnels just as a guard opened fire behind them. Bullets struck the walls. Stone cracked. But they didn't stop. Not because they were faster, but because they had something Voss would never understand. Purpose. As they slipped into the tunnel's darkness, Keanu turned back for one last look at the estate, the place where it had all begun. And in that moment, he made a vow. Even if he had to lose everything, even if the world turned against him, he would not let Samir's story be buried. He would not let evil rewrite history. But what he didn't know yet was that someone had already betrayed them. Someone inside the circle. Someone who had just handed their location straight to Damien Voss. The final broadcast, the cabin deep in the forest, had no electricity, no running water, and no heating system, beyond a small cast-iron stove, but in that moment, it felt like the safest place in the world. Keanu and Layla sat by the fire, wrapped in thick blankets pulled from an old trunk, their faces illuminated by orange flickers of flame. Outside, the woods groaned beneath the weight of snow, and every gust of wind felt like it carried voices from a world that no longer trusted silence. They had barely slept, barely spoken, each of them haunted by the truth that Arden's betrayal had almost cost them everything. But what disturbed them more than the danger was the look in Arden's eyes when he lowered his weapon. He had been unsure, torn, almost human again, which meant there was still time. Still a chance that not everyone who had been bought by Voss was beyond redemption. Even so, they could not wait. There was no guarantee the cabin's location was safe, no certainty the Queen and Joseph were even still alive. All they had now was the drive, their will, and the knowledge that the world would not give them a second chance to tell this story. Keanu placed the drive gently on the wooden table and stared at it for a long time. He could hear Samir's voice in the back of his mind. Not words exactly, but the echo of a moment long ago when a boy with nothing gave everything. He remembered the way Samir had laughed once, not with joy, but with hope, like someone who believed laughter itself could keep pain away. That laughter now lived inside this drive. The truth it held was more than a video. It was a doorway to justice, a crack in the wall that Damien Voss and others like him had spent years building, and that crack had to break open. With no internet in the cabin, Keanu knew they had to move. Layla had one last option, a safe communication outpost hidden in the nearby hills, left behind by an old resistance network. It was risky, old, and unreliable, but if they could reach it, they could broadcast the video to a dozen verified humanitarian channels. Once it was out, it could not be stopped. Once it was seen, Voss would no longer be able to erase it. The world would know the truth, and once the world knew, they would have to choose between comfort and justice, silence and courage. Before they left, Layla opened the satchel of documents again. Tucked inside was a final sealed letter from Samir, one meant to be read only if the hospital plan failed. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. But if you're still fighting, then something went right. You don't owe me revenge. You owe the world the truth. And the truth isn't a weapon, it's a light. Even in the dark, it waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward. If that's you, then you're not alone anymore. And if I'm not there to see it, just promise me one thing. Don't stop walking." Keanu closed his eyes. Those words were heavier than any bullet, sharper than any knife. He stood up, packed the drive, and took one last look at the fireplace. Then he turned to Layla and said, "Let's go." The hike through the forest was slow and cold. Branches cracked underfoot, and frozen mist clouded their breath. They moved cautiously, keeping to the trees, listening for anything that didn't belong. An engine, a radio, the crunch of unfamiliar footsteps. But the forest gave them no warnings, only silence, and the occasional cry of a distant owl. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they reached the outpost, a hidden bunker covered by moss and snow, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside was a dusty room with an old radio console, a satellite uplink dish buried under a tarp, and an emergency generator that hadn't been used in over a decade. Layla went straight to work, brushing off cobwebs, checking wires, flipping switches. Keanu helped where he could, clearing snow from the satellite dish and adjusting its position toward the sky. When the generator finally sputtered to life, it sounded like a dying animal, but it worked. Lights flickered on. The old radio console buzzed, and the monitor glowed faintly, asking for input. Layla inserted the drive and began uploading the video to the secure broadcast channel. The signal was weak, but holding. 10 minutes, she said. "We just need 10 minutes. Keanu stood watch at the doorway, eyes scanning the woods. But they both knew 10 minutes was a long time in a world where Voss had eyes everywhere. And they were right. 5 minutes into the upload, Keanu spotted movement through the trees. Black shapes, 6 of them, moving like wolves, spreading out, coordinated. The enemy had found them. Again. "We've got company," Keanu said, grabbing a flare gun from the wall and checking its charge. Layla didn't look up. "Just hold them off. We're almost there." The first soldier stepped into view, rifle raised. Keanu fired the flare into the snow at his feet, blinding him with smoke and heat. More followed, but Keanu wasn't aiming to kill. He wasn't here to become a soldier. He just needed time. 5 minutes. 4. Then 3. The enemy closed in faster. Bullets hit the bunker walls. Keanu ducked behind cover, breathing hard, his knuckles white around a rusted pipe. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of failing. Inside, Layla continued to type, rerouting signal paths, stabilizing the feed. The upload bar inched forward, 80%, then 90. Then a sudden power surge caused the console to spark. Everything went black for half a second, then came back on. The upload continued, but so did the attack. A soldier threw a flashbang through the broken window. Keanu dove over Layla, shielding her as the room exploded in white light and deafening sound. When the ringing stopped, Keanu was bleeding from his temple. Layla shook him, eyes wide with fear. "We're almost there," she shouted. "Don't stop now." He stood again, dizzy but focused. He grabbed the metal chair, swung it like a weapon as another soldier tried to enter through the side door. The man fell back, dazed. Keanu locked the door again, jamming it with the broken chair leg. "How much longer?" he shouted. 1 minute, Layla called out. And then suddenly the screen turned green. "Upload complete." Keanu slumped against the wall, breathless. "It's done?" he asked. Layla nodded. "It's done." The truth was free. Somewhere in the world, someone had just received the video. In the next hour it would be mirrored, shared, published, and no one could stop it now. But just as they allowed themselves that breath of victory, they heard it. The final wave of soldiers, moving in with more force than before. This time they weren't coming to search. They were coming to kill. And then, out of the trees, came a roaring engine. A black SUV burst through the clearing, its tires spinning snow, its doors flung open. Joseph was behind, the wheel, and the Queen was in the passenger seat shouting, "Get in!" Keanu grabbed Layla and ran. They jumped in as bullets cracked against the metal. The SUV tore away, speeding through the trees, the Queen guiding Joseph through hidden paths, like she had done this 100 times before. Inside, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Joseph said, "You did it." Keanu looked out the window. "No," he said. Samir did, and far behind them, the bunker burned. But the truth had already escaped the flames. The promise built from ashes the morning after the video was released. The world didn't wake up the same. It didn't start with a bang or a storm or breaking news sirens. It started quietly, like a whisper rising from the cracks. In a small newsroom in Kenya, a young reporter opened an encrypted message and watched the footage in silence, her eyes wide with disbelief. In Argentina, a teacher paused her lesson to show her students what bravery looked like in the face of death. In Japan, a retired soldier wept silently as he watched a 10-year-old boy throw himself in front of a gun. By noon, the video had crossed every border, shattered every algorithm, and appeared on every screen that couldn't be controlled by Damien Voss. It could not be blocked. It could not be taken down. It was truth, raw, unfiltered, and unstoppable. For the first time in years, people around the world were not divided by anger or noise. They were united by a child's courage. They saw Samir's face. They saw the soldier's rifle. They saw a journalist nearly executed. And they saw something that could not be ignored. The simple, terrifying bravery of a forgotten boy who had once lived in the shadows. And slowly, one by one, the world began to speak. Protesters filled streets across Europe, holding signs with Samir's name written in hundreds of languages. Human rights groups demanded the arrest of Damien Voss and the dismantling of every company connected to his empire. Journalists who had once stayed silent found their voices again. A few even came forward with their own footage, their own evidence. The dam had broken. and the flood was coming. Inside a quiet hospital in Prague, Joseph Durrani gave his final interview. With the Queen at his side and cameras recording his every word, he told the story he had buried for 15 years. The story of a boy who saved him, the story of a truth buried under threats and fear. And when he finished speaking, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the very notebook Samir had carried on the day of the shooting. He wrote stories, Joseph said, not just about war, about hope, about dreams, about bicycles, and stars and what he would build one day if people stopped fighting. And then he held the notebook up to the cameras and said, "This was his voice, and we are done ignoring it." Meanwhile, Damien Voss had vanished. In the hours after the video aired, his legal team scrambled to deny everything. His companies issued statements of confusion, claiming the footage was fake, manipulated, politically motivated. But the world was no longer interested in excuses. Governments began freezing his assets. Investigations reopened. War crime charges were filed. One by one, the powerful men who had hidden behind him began to turn on each other, and slowly, like smoke rising from a fire too large to contain, Voss's empire began to fall. But the story wasn't over. Not for Keanu, not for Layla, not for Samir. Weeks after the dust began to settle, Keanu stood in front of an empty field outside Casablanca, the land Samir once walked on as a child, the place where dreams had almost died. The field was quiet, but the sky above it was alive, filled with drones capturing every angle for millions watching from around the world. Beside him stood Layla, holding the final blueprint in her hands. And across from them stood Queen Elena, her royal guard standing far behind, out of view. There were no celebrities, no press conferences, no loud announcements. Only one microphone, one flag, one voice. Keanu stepped forward. His hair was longer now, streaked with ash and snow from all they had been through. His face carried the lines of sleepless nights, of pain endured and hope fought for. But his eyes were calm, steady, ready. "I came here months ago for a fundraiser," he said softly, "and I left with a story that changed my life. I was mistaken for a waiter, and maybe I should have been, because that night I was served something greater than food or fame. I was served a reminder that kindness matters, that silence is not safety, and that sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth." He paused, letting the wind carry his words. Samir Ben Halim was 10 years old when he stepped between a gun and a man he had never met. He didn't ask if it was safe. He didn't wonder if the world would remember him. He acted because it was right. And because of him, we're here. Layla stepped forward and opened the blueprint. "This is not just a hospital," she said. "This is a promise to every child who's ever been forgotten. A place where courage is medicine, where kindness is law, and where Samir's name will never be erased." Together, they placed the first stone, not symbolic, not decorative. Real. The foundation of what would soon rise into a state-of-the-art global healing center, built with donations from millions, support from dozens of nations, and the fire of a single boy's legacy. It would offer care to all who entered, regardless of origin or story, and every hallway would carry a quote from Samir's journal, translated into every major language on Earth. Later that night, Keanu stood alone on the edge of the field, staring up at the stars. The crowd had gone home. The speeches had ended, the cameras had turned off, but he stayed, thinking not of what had been won, but of what had been saved. The Queen approached slowly, her hands folded in front of her. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I wasn't done," Keanu replied. "You kept your promise." He nodded. So did Samir. They stood in silence. Then she said, "What now?" Keanu looked out at the horizon. "We keep walking," he said. Like he asked. Far away, in a small village, a group of children gathered around a projector. They were watching the video, again, not because it was sad, but because it made them feel strong. A little girl pointed at the screen and whispered, "I want to be like him." And somewhere, maybe only in spirit, a boy with dirt on his face and a medal around his neck smiled, knowing his voice had been heard, not just for a moment, but forever.